Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to the second panel of Green Hope Foundation's virtual SDG Summit, which is on resetting the milestones, multidisciplinary perspectives on the last decade of action. My name is Kekushan, and I will be the moderator of this panel. I am the founder-president of Green Hope Foundation, which is a global social innovation enterprise. We are so excited to have such amazing speakers today. So a very, very warm welcome to all of our panelists and to our audience on Zoom and on Facebook Live. So we are currently in a state of pandemic pause because as countries venture out slowly trying to restore semblances of regularity, it is time to take stock of where we stand at a local, national, and global level with regard to the Sustainable Development Goals roadmap. Now, however, the launch of the last decade of action has now been derailed due to the COVID impact. So it's therefore time to use this pandemic pause for a thorough review of where we stand, as well as what needs to change. Are all the 17 goals equally important? What needs to be addressed first? And how do we reassess and reset the milestones to achieve Agenda 2030? Today, we have a very distinguished panel of experts to share their insights on these critical queries. So on that note, I would like to invite our first speaker, Madam Audrey Kitagawa, who is the chair of the Board of Trustees of the Parliament of the World's Religions. And I feel very proud to say that she's the first woman to ever hold this position. So Madam Kitagawa, we would request you to start our panel with a prayer and then share your perspectives on today's theme. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Kekushan and the Green Hope Foundation for bringing us all together today. So let us all pray. All praise and glory be unto thee, O Lord, the giver of life and all good and perfect gifts. Lord, the divine creator, doer, and remover of all our sorrows, all merciful, omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent, we ask for your guidance in all of our undertakings. Shine your light upon us and the pathways that we take upon our sacred journeys in life, that we may be walking those pathways that bring us ever closer to you and into our hearts of compassion, kindness, love, and selfless service to others in your most sacred and holy name. Amen, amen, Om Shanti, 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 peace, peace, peace. Thank you so much again for bringing us together on this very important examination and reflection to discuss the Sustainable Development Goals and the UN's 2030 Agenda in the context of what this current pandemic has shown to us of the underlying inequalities that have brought us to the forefront of our lives. There's no question that we are in unprecedented times with the radical shifts in our economy, our institutions, healthcare, social, and family lives. So the modicum of normalcy as we have known it has gone out the window. This is causing us to reflect more deeply on the factors that have brought about the many symptoms which these 17 Sustainable Development Goals are seeking to address. As things have rapidly unfolded now, we must question the indicator that drives the SDGs. The indicator used as a measurement of growth to end poverty, hunger, and bring about the fruition of the SDGs is the GDP, or the Gross Domestic Product, which tracks the health of a country's economy. It represents the value of all goods and services produced over a specific time period within a country's borders. But the question becomes, if we use GDP as the indicator of economic health, is that the correct indicator to use? This brings me to goal number 16, which I have been asked to specifically address, And goal number 16 is to promote peaceful and inclusive societies for all sustainable development, and to provide access to justice for all and build effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions at all levels. The deeper analysis is, are we equating economic health as measured by GDP with human well-being? Is there a false equivalence going on here? GDP assumes an ability for infinite growth when we already know that such growth is not possible because you are accessing limited resources from which that growth is being generated. The limited resource, of course, is the earth. The institutions which have been created to drive this growth have birthed transnational corporate behemoths that cover extractive industries such as oil and gas, mining for precious metals, chemical-intensive agriculture, and food markets to meet our consumption habits that belie the increasing pathogenic transfers from animal to people, which is causative of these viruses' rapid spread. So COVID-19, H1N1, swine flu, avian flu, SARS, Ebola, all have animal origins. There is also a direct correlation between the destruction of our rainforests and environment as accelerative of the rapid spread of these diseases. With globalization of travel, markets, consumption habits, wild animal trade, and the like have all accelerated the degradation of our environment and the rapid extinction of species that is decimating our biodiversity. This is pushing the reality of mass extinction, including the extinction of ourselves as humans, ever closer. According to research published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, the critical window for the prevention of massive losses of biodiversity and species will close much sooner than formerly assumed, and that will be within 10 to 15 years. We are eroding the capabilities of the planet to maintain human life and life in general, which will reach a tipping point of no return that will unleash the massive failure of ecosystems, destabilize economies and governments, and trigger famine and refugee crises. If we don't understand how our economic indicator of growth through GDP has given us a false sense of security, then our institutions cannot ensure access to justice for all, because the infrastructure and institutions that perpetuate and reinforce this model will be constantly dealing with symptoms that arise from this model that is ultimately leading us to systemic failure. I want to be clear that I'm not saying the SDGs have not been appropriately identified, nor that the 17 goals should not be achieved. What I am saying is that we need to examine whether that concept of GDP as the indicator of economic health needs to be re-examined and possibly changed to a model of well-being and health for the earth and the life forms that reside upon it. The preamble of the Constitution of UNESCO declares that since wars begin in the minds of men, it is in the minds of men that the defenses of peace must be constructed. In 1945, UNESCO was created in order to respond to the firm belief of nations forged by 2 world wars in less than a generation that political and economic agreements are not enough to build a lasting peace. Peace must be established on the basis of humanity's moral and ethical solidarity. The growth of global challenges such as inequality, exclusion, violence, and sectarianism has resulted in a foreseeable social intolerance that drives humanity apart. The question becomes, has this concept of unlimited growth off of limited resources actually created the problems? Because we see the movement of much of the world's wealth into fewer hands of the world's wealthiest people, the increasing loss of the middle class, which is really the moderating fulcrum point of balance in society, and the growing numbers of poor. Let us rethink what we are doing. and whether true inclusion can be obtained when so many are becoming marginalized, whether through poverty, race, ethnicity, or gender. The 2030 Agenda is a plan of action for people, planet, and prosperity. It seeks to strengthen the universal peace in larger freedom. However, we cannot achieve universal peace in larger freedom unless we can change our unlimited growth model based on GDP to a well-being model that inherently understands that our well-being, health, and survival depends on a healthy earth environment where predation gives way to honoring the earth and life as sacred, that we cannot endlessly plunder. We must be in cooperative relationship with each other as earnestly contributing members of a living earth community that values life and the life of the earth. If we destroy the environment, we destroy ourselves in the reflections and deep contemplation of our lives, and that what it means to be truly human is to have the mindfulness that we must cultivate our inner lives and ground them in ethical principles and values, that we may move through life as a loving, kind, and compassionate people, caring for each other and the earth because we comprise one living ecosystem. As individuals comprising the human species, we each bear great responsibility to develop our inner lives, lives that are firmly grounded in ethical, moral, values-based codes of minding, speaking, and acting that are respectful, loving, and kind. As we search for this common morality, which arises from that sacred ground of being, from which all of life arises, and to which all of life returns, and from which all religions and sacred teachings and texts arise, but which transcends all religious traditions and faiths. These ethical principles serve as a remembrance of how we should live our lives daily in the development of ourselves as better people. So let us conduct ourselves in ways that are expressions of living life grounded in ethical values and practices, that we ourselves may be that radiant hope, beacon of hope and kindness that will inspire and touch the lives of all those we meet. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madam Kitagawa. Thank you for highlighting how important it is to be grounded in the ethics and be grounded with empathy, compassion, and love for one another and growing with harmony, and also for talking about how we can improve on GDP and actually see how we can create an indicator for human and environmental well-being instead of just focusing on economic health. So thank you so much once again. Our next speaker is Ms. Maria Fernanda Espinoza. She's the former president of the United Nations General Assembly and former Minister of Foreign Affairs and Minister of Defense of Ecuador. Ms. Maria, you have the floor.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. My greetings to all the wonderful speakers today and to the people in the audience, of course. Thank you to the Green Hope Foundation for bringing us together and discuss, I think, a very critical and timely issue, which is how to reset the milestones that define a successful implementation of Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals. I would like to start by sharing some thoughts about what we have learned because of the pandemic, because of COVID. And I think that the first lesson is that we are all very vulnerable, frail, and interdependent as humankind. And that what we have been saying for so long is so relevant. And it had, a strong reason, is that we need a robust health and education system. And these are central for preparedness and response capacity when facing any catastrophic scenario, not just this pandemic, but climate change, but the nuclear threat and others. I think it's critical. And the other lesson learned is that we need a strong state and a whole of society approach to address and deal with any crisis situation. I think that we have also witnessed this COVID magnifying glass effect for inequalities and looking at who are the most affected. And we look at the persons with disabilities, indigenous peoples, elders, refugees and internally displaced persons, and women, of course, women and girls that deserve a very special, a specific analysis. And I think regarding women and girls, we have witnessed a great paradox. On one hand, the extraordinary role of female heads of state and government, the more than 70% healthcare providers that are women. So we have been, you know, the frontliners in responding to this crisis, but at the same time, yet again, victims of the pandemic has, you know, put in the open again women and girls, the escalating domestic violence rates, the situation of women in zones of war and conflict, the increase of unpaid work, the loss of jobs, and the decrease in salaries of women. So there is a differentiated impact of this crisis on the most vulnerable groups. I think that we have also learned that any response to COVID and the post-COVID and the recovery process has to be system-wide, holistic. We need to address at the same time the full package. I know it's easy to say, difficult to do, but the social, economic, environmental implications of the current situation, and we have to address them at the same time. I think that I hear people saying the post-COVID scenario, but we are still in the midst of a pandemic that is now hitting very hard the global south. It has been, the epicenter has displaced from northern countries to Latin America and more to Africa right now. So I think that we need to work together, you know, in the first response to COVID with a system-wide holistic approach. And I think this is critical when we think about the sustainable development goal. We have also learned that the unilateral, the go-it-alone responses are insufficient to address global crises such as the pandemic. We have learned that, a strong, efficient global governance, a multilateral architecture that can deliver. And what I was saying before, that the pandemic is not over yet. So first response with the prevention, care, treatment, testing is still urgent and necessary, but we should not forget the rest of the agenda, the rest of the issues that are equally threatening to our own survival and to the survival of our planet. So we see, you know, what have been the financial and economic implications of the crisis. And I was looking at numbers yesterday, which are shocking. You know, the economic global growth contraction will be about 8%, and would just touch 90% of the developing economies that will experience a strong recession due to the drop in the prices of commodities and the sharp decrease of income and employment. We are speaking now, we started by 40, we went to 60, and now the last information from the World Bank speaks about 71 million more people that will be living in extreme poverty because of the crisis. And half of the world's workforce, which is 1.6 billion people, will be left without livelihoods. There will be a loss of 8.5 trillion in world production, the sharpest contraction, the experts say, since the Great Depression of the 1930s. So basically, in this very complex scenario, what we need to do, and I think it is obvious that we need to recalibrate, retool the Sustainable Development Goals. And the starting point, because I hear saying, well, the Sustainable Development Goals are not relevant anymore, we need to think differently, but I think we should take the 2030 agenda. It has to continue to be our shared blueprint, our global social contract, but of course we need to, as I mentioned, to recalibrate and retool. Of course, we need to reassess the targets, the indicators, considering the new COVID and post-COVID scenarios. On one hand, I think that we have seen the devastating losses in the economy, in jobs, in livelihoods, the regression in numbers, in poverty alleviation, in food security, and other critical indicators. But on the other hand, we are seeing huge stimulus and recovery packages. The G20, the European Union, the US, they speak about trillions. I have difficulties even translating the trillions into Spanish language, but we speak about 12, 13 trillion dollars for recovery, for a recovery package. But the big question here is that we cannot go back to business as usual. What is that we're going to do with these 12, 13 trillion dollars? And basically, I think that we all agree that we need to wiser and better investment, for example, in post-carbon economies. And I think that that sounds the right thing to do, but recent findings show that only 0.2% of the COVID-related spending by the 50th largest economy is directed to the green economy. 0.2 right now, and you know, the optimistic views say no, because then the money is going to just be addressed in the right you know, sectors. The greening of the energy, the greening of the economy is going to happen, greener jobs, etc. But we really are very anxious to see that this 0.2% are going to go beyond that. And this is a study made by Bloomberg with key scientists and economic experts. So I think it's not this retooling and rethinking, it's not only a matter of adjusting numbers and indicators, it's not an arithmetic exercise. I think we do need to establish a new social pact. And we need to go back to the basics. What I mean by go back to the basics is a new pact between society, the economy, and our planet. A new Green Deal that, you know, we have spoken about this new global Green New Deal for a long time. And I think it is time to translate this global Green New Deal in concrete action and policy. I think that we cannot go back we cannot afford to go back to the logic of either people or planet. This is something that it's a false paradox. We have to work with both at once, since they are, as we all know, inextricably connected. And as Ms. Kitagawa was mentioning very, very wisely. So I think that what we perhaps need now is a globally agreed checklist in what we mean by building back better. We are saying we need to build back better. And of course, we need to agree on what we mean by building back better. We need to go back to the basics, but to be careful not to hide behind the COVID crisis to weaken or divert our commitments to the Sustainable Development Goals. And we have to be very careful about that. Going back to the basics is going back to our health commitments, universal health coverage, food security, safe water, education, jobs, and of course, nature-based solutions, climate, ecosystems, and nature. And fortunately, the challenge is everything at the same time, not one after the other. It's the either or equation. We know it doesn't work. So I think that on the climate front, I won't go into the details, but we do have commitments that are not sufficient. We know that the Paris Agreement is not good enough if we want to reach the 1.5 degree limit. This implies to go far beyond the Paris commitments. It requires net zero emission strategies for 2050, or even before that. We need to enhance our nature-based solutions, regeneration, to take care about our threatened or degraded ecosystems, etc., etc. So I think that this idea that now it's like common sense, the key to decarbonize the economy and protect people's health at the same time, and how to decarbonize. And we know that we need to rethink sectors such as the shipping, housing, transportation, energy, and the steel and cement industries, etc., etc. So it is a tough call. We understand that, but it is important that we start thinking seriously about that. I think that just to repeat that, the critical point all of the COVID recovery package should consider green jobs, green production, green economy. It will be our opportunity for a greener recovery through smart public investment, etc. So I think that we do need an agreed global checklist. I would call it that way, a global checklist on what we mean by building back better. Otherwise, we can be in trouble again. And perhaps just to close, I think it's very important to use in everything we do our women's lens. Any recovery plan or strategy has to have women and girls at the center. It seems like a mantra now, but we need to, it is imperative that we look at jobs, salaries, social protection, and safety nets, political participations, the Green Deal, the climate decarbonization has to have women at the center. I think that the Beijing +25 process and the Generation Equality Forum, I think, are golden opportunities to do that, to connect this discussion on recovery with women rights and women empowerment. So I think it is critical. And just to end, we hear a lot of what to do. This has been a time of great intellectual creativity, even how to do it. But I think that we have been a little weaker in talking about who is going to do it. And who, I mean, not only the who, WHO, but the who is what are the governance and institutional arrangements we need, the global leadership we need. And I think it is clear that we need more collective action, more cooperation and solidarity, a robust, accountable, efficient multilateral system. And we certainly need a rejuvenated, revitalized United Nations that is relevant to all and responds to the need of people on the ground. And yet again, we have an opportunity, which is the 75th anniversary of the UN. There is a great global conversation going about the future of the UN we want and we need. And I think it is very, very relevant that we continue to foster this culture of multilateralism. And I think this idea of really crafting a culture of multilateralism at all levels, citizens, young people, should see the irreplaceable role of the multilateral approaches in global governance. We have understood now very clearly that unilateral responses are not fit to address global crises such as this pandemic or climate change. So I think that we do have an opportunity to rethink our blueprint, to strengthen global leadership in the multilateral system, to use a gender and women's lens on what we do, and to make sure that the recovery packages are, we have clarity on what we mean by building back better with a globally agreed checklist. So I will end there, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Maria. You brought up some very, very important points on, of course, how we cannot go back to business as usual and how it's so important that we do establish a new social pact working with both people and planet, and of course, having a globally agreed checklist on what and how to build back better, and of course, using a women and girl-centric lens to address all of our planet's issues. So thank you once again. Our next speaker is Ms. Mary Robinson, who is the chair of the Elders Adjunct Professor of Climate Justice in Trinity College, Dublin, and former President of Ireland. Mrs. Robinson, you have the floor.
Thank you very much indeed, and I'm really very happy to participate in this Green Hope Virtual SDG Summit. And I'd really like to build on what two of the distinguished panelists have already said on what Audrey Kitagawa and my dear friend Maria Fernanda Espinoza have said, because I broadly agree with the points that they have been making. And I'd like to just address the questions we were put and then deal particularly with the two Sustainable Development Goals, Goal 5 and Goal 13, that I was asked to have a focus on. The first question I think we were basically asked is, the question of which SDGs have suffered the worst from COVID-19. I would actually say they have all suffered because COVID-19 is a great exacerbator of the inequalities that were there, and the inequities and the inadequacies. It has simply made all of those situations worse, and it has brought out something that's really very important for the feminist tradition, the intersectionality between poverty, race, gender, inequality, being a migrant, being a person with disabilities, being indigenous, being on the margins, all of those issues, being in an abusive household when we're supposed to stay at home in lockdown, all of those things. And I think all of the SDGs have suffered, and I think the whole language of the SDGs has suffered, but I do agree that that language itself needs to be refined and improved. And the second question, I think, is a very important one. What are the lessons from the pandemic as we need to build into the reshaping of the last decade of action, as you call it? And I want to again build on, in particular, what Maria Fernanda was saying, because I think there are important lessons from COVID-19. The first lesson to me is the fact that collective behavior of people matters. It's actually the only thing that's saving us from the worst aspects of the vaccine at the moment. We don't have a virus. If we didn't comply with lockdown and social distancing and washing our hands and so on, things would be a great deal worse. And why are we doing it? To protect those more vulnerable and to protect the health workers and the care workers and those who are providing special services. It's a lesson to remember afterwards when we are thinking about building back better, that we need everybody, and that everybody working together can make a difference in our consumer habits in lots of other ways that we weren't thinking about as much beforehand. The second thing is science matters. I think it has been really important that we're listening to the health experts, that government policy is based on the health experts. We weren't listening enough to the climate scientists. The children were begging us to listen to the science, but we weren't, and taking it seriously enough. So coming out of this, we need to really put the science very strongly up there. The third issue, and this has been touched on already, is that government matters. I too take some pleasure in the fact that women-led governments at the moment are by and large doing better, whether it's Angela Merkel in Germany or the prime ministers of Norway, Denmark, Finland, Iceland, or Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand, or the president of Taiwan. They've taken tough decisions, they've listened to the science, and they've brought their people with them, and they're coming out of it now more quickly on behalf of their people. So government matters, and in fact, I think it's going to be very clear and rather cruel in the exposure of bad governments, of governments who didn't act quickly enough because they had their own priorities, of governments that don't pay attention to the science, who have maybe personal ambitions. And I think you know some of the people I'm talking about. It will be very cruel to see the unnecessary deaths and illness and unnecessary exposure of economies to a longer period and maybe a resurgence. We'll see all that in a few months' time, and we will really learn how much government matters. And we're very conscious that nature matters. We're all, noting that the air is cleaner, that the birds can sing, that we're somehow seeing that link with nature more vividly. And I totally agree with the points that have been made already about the importance of nature-based solutions and that approach going forward. And the last thing I would say, and I don't think it's to be underestimated, compassion matters. We are seeing more thoughtfulness about the other. And it comes from the fact that we're all suffering in some measure. Now, I'm the first to say that COVID-19 is not a great leveler. It has, as I said, exacerbated the inequalities, etc. But we are all suffering a bit and therefore more open to the suffering of others, more open to the empathy of that suffering. I say that because I have been struggling to get an understanding of climate justice, of the fact that it affects the poorest countries disproportionately, the fact that it affects indigenous peoples, small island states, the gender dimensions, the intergenerational dimensions. And people have kind of looked at me and they haven't really said, well, or more they've said, well, that's not me. But now there is more understanding, as was mentioned earlier, our fragility, our vulnerability as a human species even, and that we need to think more about some of the basics, the very basic values, as has been said. And I do agree that the SDGs cannot be based on GDP alone as a measurement, that we really have to look at a much more sustainable way and a nature-based way, a link with nature of going forward. So let me, in the limited time I have, then focus a little bit on Goal 5 and Goal 13. First of all, Goal 5 on global, on gender equality. What a pity it is that we haven't got the opportunity this year to highlight in Beijing Plus 25, which is now postponed, in 1325 on sexual violence against women, rape as a form of crime, etc., marking its 20th anniversary, also postponed. Because these are opportunities to raise the gender equality issues. Instead, we're seeing the devastation of the inequalities of COVID-19. I'm thinking, just think of girls' education, the girls out of school. In one part of the world, it means that they can use Zooms and other ways of being virtually in school, and they're not suffering that much. Yes, they're losing out on socializing with their friends and so on, but it's not so bad and they are continuing to learn. But in many parts of the world, when a girl is out of school, that's going to be it. The likelihood of her getting back into school is going to be very worrying. The fact that she will be pushed into early child marriage is a very real threat. And these are the real inequalities that are being exacerbated. And then the poorest countries are suffering far more from COVID-19. They're suffering from the lack of remittances going from workers from those countries in the parts of the world where they held down jobs that allowed them to send their remittances, and their jobs are gone. The capital has flown from the developing countries. We're seeing a huge need for a debt relief that is really understanding that we need to address, and we need the G20 to step up and do that. So gender equality is just one of those huge times when somehow we are seeing that, as I said earlier, women are leading at the top, but they're also the workers at the bottom. They're the health workers, they're the care workers, they're the cleaners of hospitals, they're the those who do essential jobs are so often women in the front lines, and they are coping or trying to cope. So that brings me to the third question that you asked about how to address how do we bring the voices of women, the marginalized, indigenous women and girls into this. And I think that's by understanding what they're doing in their communities and telling those stories. That's what I did with my book, Climate Justice, Hope, Resilience, and the Fight for a Sustainable Future. 11 stories, 9 of them about women, but there were also 2 good men. But there were stories of very poor people disproportionately affected by the lifestyles of those of us elsewhere, and coping and building resilience, which is what we have to do. And that brings me to goal 13, the focus on climate in the Sustainable Development Goals. Actually, I think the discussion of coming out of COVID-19 has been a bit too narrowly focused on climate and emissions, rather than on the broader sustainable development issues that we have to focus on. And the fact that we actually need the nature-based solutions. I've become a champion of the nature-based solutions, that we need to preserve 30% of the land and 30% of the oceans. Really important for addressing the Sustainable Development Goals. And I think it's going to be important that we think, as has been said, about recalibrating and retooling the Sustainable Development Goals to address the weaknesses that COVID-19 has exposed. The fact that we don't have health systems in many parts of the world that can cope, that we don't have education systems that can cope well, and that these are the priorities that we have to address in coming back. And let me conclude my contribution by speaking the words of the founder of the Elders. You introduced me as chair of the Elders, which is my main responsibility at the moment. And Nelson Mandela had a lovely succinct statement when he was talking about, yes, we have a big hill to climb, we have a lot to do. And he would say, it always seems impossible until it is done. And I love that expression. It always seems impossible until it is done. We have to build back better with COVID-19 as a cross on our backs, if you like, something that is really serious and difficult, but it is a reminder of our connectivity, of our fragility, of our human nature, of our compassion for each other, of the fact that we have to do this as never before, collectively together, as we are managing COVID-19 collectively together. And it always seems impossible until it is done. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Robinson. And yes, collective action does matter so much. And thank you for reiterating how important it is for us to bridge the opportunity gap and address the stark inequalities that COVID has exposed, and especially working to make sure that of course, we bridge the opportunity gap, but also work on addressing girls' education, how people in poorer nations have been affected more disproportionately as compared to people in other parts of the world, and of course, the vulnerability that has been highlighted so starkly by COVID-19. So thank you so much. And you also brought up a very important point on how climate action is not the only way to address the environmental crisis, and how there are other avenues that we need to cover as well. So on that note, I would like to invite Mr. Satya Tripathi, who is the United Nations Assistant Secretary General and head of New York office at United Nations Environment Program. So Mr. Tripathi, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Kekushan, and I'm delighted to be joining this distinguished group of panelists, especially with Ms. Robinson, Ms. Espinoza, and Ms. Kitagawa, whom I have had the privilege of working together before. With Ms. Robinson, actually, the one thing that you didn't mention about her past roles, she was the High Commissioner for Human Rights more than 20 years ago, when I was appointed to run the human rights investigations operation in Bosnia by the UN to get Security Council Resolution 1088 implemented. And then, of course, with more recently with Ms. Kitagawa and Ms. Espinoza. You've requested me to focus on three of the SDGs, which is sustainable consumption and production, oceans, and life on land. They are, and of course, all the SDGs are interconnected in more ways than one can actually fathom. But these three are especially very strongly interconnected because sustainable consumption and production affects disproportionately what we do with our oceans and what we do with life on land. I'll of course speak about the specific issues pertaining to the SDGs, but before that, I'll spend a few minutes trying to frame where we are now. The panelists before me have really brought out the nature of the existential challenge that is confronting humanity, and of course all other species as well. But more importantly, humans, because COVID-19 is what we are talking about. And then, of course, the fact that before the COVID-19, we were already in an existential crisis. Just to frame it, the carbon budget for a 2°C pathway, or the threshold to breach that pathway, is 2,900 gigatons. And we have currently spent roughly about 2,600 gigatons. So we really don't have much time left anyways. And at the current rate of use, we're spending about 40 to 43 gigatons a year. And so we'll pretty much be there in 7 to 8 years' time if things do not change, not incrementally, but exponentially. Then the other problem we already had was that everybody talks about the Paris Agreement, and rightly so, because the first time that all countries of the world came around to agreeing on something. But the fact remains that the Paris Agreement, if fully implemented, of which there is little evidence at this time, will actually take us to 3.2 degrees of global warming, not 2 degrees, not 1.5 degrees. So the ambition has to really change exponentially if we are to do better. And then lastly, it was already pointed out, but it is important to note that we are in the process of losing about 1 million of the 7.8 million species that inhabit the planet. And we don't even know what they do for us. It's our arrogance. I think that's primarily responsible, but also our ignorance to a great extent. And of course, the vanity that we know while we know so little. And that is another big challenge to deal with when we are talking about sustainable consumption and production. If you talk about oceans, we are pumping, we're producing about 300 million tons of plastic every year, which is actually more than the weight of the entire human biomass on the planet. And that we are adding every year. As of today, we have put more than 9 billion tons of plastic into the atmosphere, most of which ends up in the landfills and of course in our oceans. And only 9% of which has ever been reclaimed. So 91% still remains in our land, in our oceans, and then that isn't changing. And this was already before COVID-19. What COVID-19 has done is, of course, created an economic situation. I was just reading this morning that the highest number of unemployment benefits that were given out in the US was at 45 million people, which is about 40% of the workforce in the US. And then that's extraordinary. No matter what data you access, what time you're referring to, what crisis you could possibly draw inferences from, we have never seen this ever in the history of the modern world. And that really, really makes it very difficult for the SDGs to get the attention they should. And that is why I would echo the points already made by the three distinguished panelists that we really need to think differently. Think differently, not in terms of one issue or the other, but a holistic view of everything. We had a massive gender problem worldwide, and that will only get worse. Whatever gains we had made, whether it is poverty, whether it is health, whether it is gender sensitive development, everything is at risk unless we think differently. By many estimates, we need tens of trillions of dollars to really make an impact in terms of the next 10 years, whether it is SDGs, whether it is climate impact, whether it's mitigation, whether it is adaptation, without which we can't. And we talk billions. Ms. Espinoza was talking about only 0.2% of the recovery resources have ever gone into climate, protecting the climate or the environment. Even before COVID-19, the world was on track to spending anywhere between 40 to 70 trillion dollars in the next 30 years on built infrastructure. Now we know that built infrastructure has always, without exceptions, come at the expense of ecological infrastructure. Imagine when we are going to pump in $40 trillion in the next 30 years, that's the minimum if you are very efficient. And if you are inefficient, which is most likely, that's $70 trillion of built infrastructure. What will that do to the planet, especially when we are at an inflection point where we have only 300 gigatons of carbon left before we breach the 2-degree pathway? We'll never be there. I mean, of course, that's by the turn of the century, but we would have reached the possibility of staying under that limit ever. And those are the things that I think are very important to note. And the solution, I would like to spend the next 2 minutes on a solution. Governments will not find the money. It is impossible for governments to find the resources to create a pathway that will lead us to a holistic alternative. It has to be the private sector that has to be involved. The global GDP, if you break it down in macro terms, is about 70% in the private sector and 30% in the public sector. So the private sector cannot be a disturbed neighbor. The private sector cannot be a passive bystander or an untouchable. As you know, many of my colleagues, stakeholders that I talk to, often talk about, oh, you can't work with the private sector because they are the devil. Yes, they might have been, but the point is they are also the solution. We need to engage them at every possible level and impress upon them that it is also their children we are talking about. It's their planet. It's not us versus them. It is that everybody is impacted, and sooner or later. So the sooner we wake up, the better it will be for humanity, for all the species and the planet. And engaging the private sector, harnessing the power of private finance, because that's a limitless. Just to give you a number, the top 300 pension funds in the world have $18 trillion of assets under management. Even if they were to put 5% of those assets into climate sensitive investments, that's $900 billion. That will move the needle. Those are the kind of possibilities we need to focus on and actually bring them to the table and make sure they understand what is at stake. This is not about you making a little more money or a little less money. This is about you not existing in a matter of a few decades. That's what it is. And then that's what we need to highlight. There's no need to be shying away from putting the problem in real terms for what it is. And then the more we do that, and then thank you for organizing this summit conversation with such brilliant people in the panel. We need to say that from rooftops, and that's why I'm so impressed with the young people such as yourselves or Greta or anybody else that is raising their voice around the planet. We really need to say it as loudly as we can and break this conspiracy of silence, of ignorance, of vanity, and of arrogance. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Tripathi. I think you've identified two very important words, which are arrogance and ignorance, and it's so sad that that actually prevents us from even knowing specifically, as you talked about species going extinct, what they actually even do for us. And I'm really glad that you talked about how important it is that we need a holistic view of everything, and of course, highlighting the importance of private sector involvement and harnessing the power of private finance, and really how it's so important that we all work together, all sections of civil society, private sector, and government. So thank you once again. Our next speaker is Dr. Edgar Gutierrez Espeleta, who is the Special Envoy for the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification. He's also the former Minister of Environment and Energy of Costa Rica and former President of the United Nations Environment Assembly. So Dr. Edgar, with World's Day to Combat Desertification and Drought on 17th June, we'd like you to enlighten us on the importance of land to address the implementation of the SDGs and the relation of land use practices with the present pandemic. So Dr. Edgar, the floor is yours. You're on mute, Dr. Edgar.
I'm mute. All right.
Yes.
All right. Can you hear me? Can
Yes.
you hear me?
Yeah,
Yes.
I can hear you.
I was saying that I would like to start thanking first Kekushan and the Green Hub to invite the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification to attend this interesting and pertinent virtual SDG summit. I met Kekushan in 2015 in Nairobi when I was president of the United Nations Environment Assembly. He had a strong commitment for the protection of the environment, has been for a long time motivating many young people around the world. Very recently, she has been participating in the UNCCD campaign to mobilize the young and future generations to become one of the UNCCD land heroes. I thank you, Kekushan, for being there fighting for a good cause. This event is pertinently organized during just a few days before the celebration of the Desertification and Drought Day, organized this year under the theme Food, Feed, and Fiber. The celebration on the June 17th seeks to educate individuals on how to reduce their personal impact on the land. There is a growing demand and competition for land from agriculture, urban sprawling, and infrastructure. Almost 75% of all land has been transformed from its natural state, and the pace of conversion is accelerating. Moreover, the health and productivity of existing arable land is declining, worsened by the climate change, of course. Consumers can make a positive difference because government policy and suppliers are extremely sensitive to individual market choices. If every consumer were to buy products that do not degrade the land, suppliers will cut back the flow of these products and send a powerful signal to the producer of the change needed to stay in business. Changing in our diet and shopping behaviors can free up land for other uses and lower carbon emissions. Dietary change alone can free up between 80 and 240 million hectares of land. Land is the foundation of our societies. It allows economies to grow and prosper. Land provides more than 50% of the total value of all ecosystem services. This finite resource is under existential threat. Productive land is a cornerstone to poverty eradication, zero hunger, energy for all, food security, and environmental health. Because land is finite, there is ever-increasing competition to control land resources, and capitalize on the flows of goods and services from the land. This has the potential to cause social and political instability, fueling poverty, conflicts, and forced migration. Each year, more than 12 million hectares are lost to land degradation, desertification, and recurrent droughts. More than half of all agricultural land is already degraded. About 70% of the Earth's ice-free land has been significantly altered already, mainly to meet the demand for agriculture. Climate change is further exacerbating the situation, with many regions becoming drier and suffering from frequent and prolonged droughts. Indeed, climate-induced water stress and land degradation could lead to loss of more arable land in the coming years, plunging millions of farmers into poverty and contributing to forced migration and conflict. The IPCC report shows that land-based actions are an essential part of the tools to be used to draw down carbon from the atmosphere into nature to stay way below 2 degrees Celsius. It warns, however, that these land-based actions are only effective now, not later, because the land's ability to fix carbon will decline, especially where the land is unhealthy. The ecosystem services lost due to land degradation are worth $10.6 trillion per year, according to a study of the economics of land degradation. By contrast, switching to sustainable land management practices could deliver up to $1.4 trillion in increased crop production. The demand for land to provide goods such as food, animal feed, bioenergy, and water needed to achieve sustainable development goals will require more land transformation. If we follow past development paths to provide the same standards of living enjoyed by the developed countries, 90% of the old natural land will be similarly transformed. The policy challenge is not to shortage of land. Rather, it is the inefficient use of the land already in use. For instance, a third of all our food is lost or wasted every year. It is lost before it leaves the farm or as expired food on grocery store shelves, at home, or as leftover food. This 1.3 billion tons of lost or wasted food is produced on about 1.4 billion hectares of land. This is about 1/3 of all agricultural land. This is 2.5 times of the 593 million hectares of new agricultural land that will be converted to feed the global population born between 2010 and 2050. This is equal to 1.5 billion hectares of land that has been degraded. To this path to the future is preventable if three actions are taken concurrently. One, further land conversion is avoided altogether because the land already converted can produce for even more than the projected population growth. Productivity of the agricultural land already is in use needs to be improved and maintained to increase productivity. Land use planning is focused on doing the right things in the right place at the right time. This is known as land degradation neutrality. Land degradation neutrality has been defined by the parties of the convention as the state whereby the amount and quality of land resources necessary to support ecosystem functions and services and enhance food security remains stable or increases within specified temporal and spatial scales and ecosystems. Yet, for long, desertification, land degradation, and drought issues were a blind spot for international community. They were dismissed as a regional or local issue. Recent developments in addressing desertification, land degradation, and drought are quite encouraging. The international community has committed to strive a land degradation neutral world by 2030. Its implementation requires multi-stakeholder agreement and planning across scales and sectors, supported by national scale coordination that utilizes existing local and regional governance structures. This target has been considered by governments at the UNCCD COP and at the General Assembly as an accelerator and integrator of the SDGs. The SDGs offer an important blueprint for collaborative actions to respond to a range of global challenges. Each of the SDGs is essential, but the reality is that all at some level place demands on land, and often these demands are competing. To deliver the SDGs, it is therefore critical to tackle land degradation. The UN Assembly has also recently recognized that land-based solutions as part of nature-based solutions constitute promising options to evaluate and consider in connection with sequestering carbon and enhancing the resilience of people and ecosystems affected by desertification, land degradation, and drought, as well as adverse effects of climate change. As of today, 123 countries have set or committed to set their land degradation neutrality targets. Land degradation neutrality is a paradigm shift in the land management policies and practices. It is a unique approach that counterbalances the expected loss of productivity land with the recovery of degraded areas. It strategically places the measure to conserve, sustainably manage, and restore land in the context of land use planning. The present pandemic has forced us to reassess our relationship with nature. How we treat nature contributes to pandemics. The expression healthy land, healthy people is truer today than ever, in line with the global approach called by the Secretary General of UN in his report entitled Shared Responsibility, Global Solidarity. Desertification, land degradation, and drought are linked to the loss of animal habitats and the spread of diseases from animals to humans. The rate of future zoonotic disease emergence or reemergence will be closely linked to the evolution of the relationship between humans and the environment, particularly the expansion of the agricultural frontier. Studies showed that 6 out of every 10 non-infectious diseases in people have spread from animals, and that 3 of every 4 emerging infectious diseases in people come from animals. Land uses that turns wild spaces into habitats for human use help viruses to cross over from wild animals to people. We will face more frequent pandemics unless we address the root causes of this one, which has already affected millions around the world. Human encroachment of nature, predominantly for food production, is the most significant factor giving rise to pandemics, with 3 out of every 4 emerging diseases spreading this way. At the end of the day, it is the most vulnerable population that suffer the most. Now, we are talking about the post-COVID scenario. We need to understand that the way we have been doing business as usual does not work. The new normality should include a transformational change in which things are done very differently, from individual decisions that build new social norms to legal and policy changes that enable us grow and prosper in a safe operating environment. We are promoting a social contract for nature, which demands new global and national governance models based on rights, rewards, and responsibilities, explicitly recognizing the fact that the future of humanity, economic growth, and nature are completely dependent on one another. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Edgar. Thank you especially for sharing your deep insights on the significance of land, as well as how the inefficient use of land is causing land degradation, desertification, and drought, and how that impacts the implementation of the SDGs, and as well as addressing how reversing land degradation and as well as achieving land degradation neutrality could help to prevent future zoonosis. So thank you once again. And last but not the least, we would like to invite Ms. Latonia Williams, who is the Forest Supervisor of the Forestry Unit of the Ministry of the Environment and Housing of the Bahamas. Ms. Williams, the floor is yours. You're on mute.
Good day. Thank you, Kekushan, and thank you, panelists, distinguished guests. Your presentations were very informative and really brought attention, hopefully, some of the highlights that I would like to give in my presentation. I actually have a PowerPoint presentation that I would like to share. So I would begin sharing my screen once Kekushan allows me to.
Oh, really?
But certainly, based on what our panelists, the previous panelists before me have spoke about, I think COVID-19 has certainly shown us that we cannot do things the same. It requires change, and certainly I think that change has to be driven from internal enterprises. Okay, so I am able to share now. Okay, good day again. So as Kekushan mentioned, my name is Latonia Williams, and I am employed with the Forestry Unit. And the topic I really wanted to bring about was Vision 2040, localizing the Sustainable Development Goals in the Bahamas. And this is more or less a snapshot of our National Development Plan of the Bahamas, certainly from a natural perspective. And based on what our distinguished panelists have discussed previously, it really highlights some of the progress we have made, as well as the challenges that still exist in not only developing countries, but most importantly, small island developing states like the Bahamas. So for those of you who aren't familiar about the Bahamas, the Commonwealth of the Bahamas is an archipelagic nation consisting of over 700 islands and 2,000 rocks and keys. Most of our population resides on the Nassau, which on Nassau, where New Providence is located, as well as Grand Bahama, where Freeport is. We actually have a population of 351,000 and a little over 400. Our culture is rich. We are certainly more than sun, sand, and sea. We are a committed people. We have a rich cultural heritage. We have a competitive spirit. Certainly, we are well known for our fine sea cuisine and our tasty bush medicine. And we have a rich environment consisting of over 8 ecosystems, including our 40 endemic Bahama vertebrates, as well as the Bahama Oriole, which is only found on the island of Anderson in the northern Bahamas. And so, apologies. So just to give you an overview of what the Sustainable Development Goal has meant for the Bahamas, we've actually really moved forward with trying to advance the agenda and the various goals. We have implemented a national development plan, which more or less is a national development plan that aims to bring about structural reform in the country. I know we spoke about and we heard about how things need to change, and certainly in the Bahamas is no different. We recognize that many systems, many mechanisms, many policies, there are many things that must change, and not only because of COVID, but certainly climate change has been a way of life for the Bahamas. I'm sure we are all familiar with Hurricane Dorian, which I'll speak about, but our National Development Plan really aimed to integrate the Sustainable Development Goals. The main pillars are governance, human capital, and the environment, and most certainly the economy. And the mantra of the National Development Plan is to leave no one behind. It's important, I think, for us in this process going forward is to recognize where some of the challenges exist in our country and where we can improve. And certainly, I think COVID-19 has demonstrated that to us. The National Development Plan, as you can see, it really incorporates and tries to integrate each of the Sustainable Development Goals. As a part of the planning process, the committee actually ensured that the Sustainable Development Goals were integrated fully in each of the strategies accompanying the National Development Plan. So the plan is therefore the vehicle through which the Bahamas will implement the Sustainable Development Goals. Kekushan basically asked me to really speak about goals number 14 and 15. Then in the National Development Plan, goal number 11 is actually related to both goal number 14 and 15 of the Sustainable Development Goals. Goal number 11, the objectives include climate change, combating it, certainly positioning the Bahamas as a leader in research and implementing climate change adaptation and mitigation measures, and as an incubator of green technologies. It aims to integrate disaster risk reduction into sustainable development policies, and certainly we want to create and use our resources in a more sustainable way, and to aid the successful implementation of a modern waste management strategy that includes public education and services to sustainability. So just to give you an overview of some of the progress that we've had towards the Sustainable Development Goal in the country, we've protected 10% of our our national marine environment in 2014. We've established the Bahamas Protected Area Fund, BPAF, which provides for the sustainable financing mechanism into perpetuity for our protected area system. And we've also recently enacted an environmental planning and protection bill, which more or less provides a comprehensive and a consolidated approach to environmental protection in the country. Progress towards Sustainable Development Goal number 15, which seeks to mainly protect terrestrial ecosystems. The country has enacted the Forestry Act, which gave birth to the Forestry Unit where I'm employed. We've recently really been encouraged to propose a national forest estate. Some of our panelists spoke about the importance of land protection and desertification, and the National Forest Estate actually attempts to provide the legal framework to provide that protection of these forest areas. We've also engaged in the 10,000 trees campaign in 2018. And this year, I think we actually expanded that goal to 100,000 trees across the country. So there's many activities going. We've also recently passed or enacted the national ban on single-use plastics. We've banned styrofoam. We've also banned the release of balloons, and there are many other things ongoing, including I think we've just established 5 new terrestrial protected areas, as well as we've really implemented our national invasive species strategy. We all are aware of Hurricane Dorian and the impacts it had on our country last year. The Hurricane Dorian was unlike any storm that the country has ever seen. And for us, this is what climate change was, and this is what climate change is. I think Dorian has really impressed upon us that this is before COVID, this has been our new norm. The Bahamas actually, unfortunately, we have the hurricane season 6 months of the year, so we know about hurricanes, but Dorian was something different. As you can see, most of the forest areas that were nice and lush and green following Dorian were completely wiped out. We had standing dead trees. We had saltwater inundation that ensued at least from storm surges at least 25 feet or higher. And so this is just a really small snapshot of the impacts of climate change, not only on our environment, but certainly on the built environment, because we are all aware that many lives, unfortunately, were lost, and we still are unaware of how many persons are missing. To bring attention to what we really wanted to discuss here today, we've recognized that the challenges in implementing the Sustainable Development Goals in the country has certainly been data collection at a national level from our, whether that's our National Statistics Agency and the capacity to collect the data, decrease finance, as well as our porous borders. The Bahamas, as I mentioned, is an archipelagic nation covering 100,000 square miles. And so it's an administrative challenge to, whether it is to provide services, transportation, to even effectively monitor and manage some terrestrial areas, and certainly capacity development. I think COVID-19 has shown us that these things still exist. And I think that's the challenge for many of us. How do we move forward? How do we do things differently and not the same? How do we stop making excuses? And it's time for action now. We have a saying in the Bahamas where we say talk is cheap, and certainly it's run its course. It certainly has run its course. And so as it relates to other challenges, having an import-based economy with multiple porous borders, we've seen that there has been some challenges in terms of who has access to what. And so it brings another question in terms of inequality in our own country and addressing those issues. Some of the lessons learned, I think many of our panelists have discussed that we know that we can do things differently. We know that our system needs to change. We know that we have to invest and empower locals. We have to protect the vulnerable, our females, our women, our girls, our jewels. And certainly we have to plan and prepare. As I mentioned, Hurricane Dorian is the new norm for the Bahamas. And it's interesting to see that many of the challenges that we observed almost 9 months ago, right? We still have more improvements. There's still room for improvement. There's still room for enhancement, and there's still more work to do. We've learned certainly through this COVID-19 that we need economic diversification. The country is heavily dependent on tourism, and so there's a lot of discussions now. There's demand for local investment. There's a demand for desertification, and from a natural perspective, I think it's important for us to really look at using our resources we would have committed in our goal number 11, to really use and sustainably use and manage our natural resources. And I think that we have an opportunity to do that. We have agritourism opportunities. COVID has shown us how heavily dependent our country is on food imports. I think our food import bill is over at least $200 million. Why can't we start growing food here? We've seen the potential of Bohemians. We've seen them come to the forefront, step up to the front line as our healthcare workers, feeding each other. We have our environment, our biodiversity. Persons will pay to come to our country, certainly once provisions is allowed, but we have cultural heritage. We have forest resources that we can use to help gain employment, to help entrepreneurship as well as career development. We can make products, we can export, we can do so many things internally once once we begin to invest locally and help develop Bahamians more. So certainly going forward, I think that it's important for us to continue to invest in Bahamians. I think that it's important that we consider a paradigm shift. This is a time, I think, not to look at our geography as a barrier, but more or less let's look at the opportunities that we can have. This photo you see of myself and Mr. McKinney was actually taken in Crooked Island. He was a cascarilla farmer, and for those who aren't familiar, cascarilla is another forest-based product that we have in the Bahamas that's actually used in Campari. And so he's a harvester who's dedicated to, he's quite involved and he's dedicated to his job. But it just shows that we have potential, we have persons who are willing, and we just need to invest in them and give them the time. And as my panelist said, I think that COVID has shown us that the time is certainly now, and our impacts today, but certainly, hopefully, I apologize, hopefully we can make some difference, and not only for ourselves, but for future generations. And I think it's important that we're not only seen as just individuals, we remember that we are human beings. And I think that's the order of the day. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Williams. And thank you for sharing the excellent work that the Bahamas has done to achieve the SDGs and leave no one behind, accurately identifying the challenges and building back better from the devastating impact of Hurricane Dorian as well as COVID-19, and identifying the lessons learned. And you're so right, as you reiterated, we do need a paradigm shift. So thank you once again, and thank you so much to all of our panelists for such an enriching discussion. And I can see here that we have many questions. So I would request all our panelists to stay on for a few more minutes. So the first question that I'll take is from Madhumita. So I will be promoting you to a panelist. Let's see, we should be seeing Madhumita soon. Yes.
Am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Hello, my name is Madhumita and I'm from Dubai. Thank you so much, first of all, to all the panelists. It was an extremely inspiring discussion. And my question is to Dr. Edgar. Conventional solutions will not work in the mitigation of this crisis. So what should the state leaders and the parliamentarians do differently to aid in the recovery process?
Thank you, Madhumita. Dr. Edgar?
Can you repeat the question? I didn't hear it very well.
So my question is, conventional solutions will not work in the mitigation of this crisis. So what should the state leaders and the parliamentarians do differently to aid the recovery process?
Guys, I'm sorry. I have problems hearing.
It's absolutely fine. So I think, Madhumita, correct me if I'm wrong. So you're saying conventional solutions will not really work in terms of addressing this COVID crisis. So what can parliamentarians and state leaders do to address this crisis?
All right. Thank you very much for the question. Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, of course. I mean, we have to embrace different exits to the problems that we are facing now. And what all the panelists agree is that we have to shift our paradigm. Here we are facing not only a health situation with the COVID-19, but also what, thanks to this health issue, we are seeing, and already Mary said it. I mean, we are seeing a world that has a lot of inequalities and a lot of distributional problems, not only with food, but also with the access of income and opportunities for having a decent life. And then I think I'm convinced on this, and also this came from Kekushan was saying at the beginning. Governments, and I was a minister. I mean, we can do a difference. We can do a difference, but we must call for people to ask for a shift in the paradigm. I mean, you, me, our neighbors, and everyone individually, we must embrace a cause to actually call for a change in our route. We can no longer support this, and this came.
Might overrun a few minutes, I think.
This comes for something that Audrey was saying, and at the end of the day, I have been seeing, for example, a lot of UN resolutions, most of them not binding because of the way UN is built. We have been seeing commitments from countries, from governments, but then those that are democratic, comes another government, and those commitments are thrown in the garbage can. So I think also that the religious communities could play a very important role calling for the morality and the ethical issues that each of us must comply with. And I think we have to bring, and I think it was common on all the panelists as well, we have to call for a very much a broad call for everybody to act on this. Not only governments or parliaments, they are facilitators of processes, but the ones that call for the start of a process is the people, is us, is each of us. And I think that is a responsibility that we cannot avoid.
Thank you so much, Dr. Edgar. And because we have slight time constraints, I'm going to move on to our next question. So I will promote our next person to panelist. So our next question is from Ishmael Roland Kamara. So I am promoting Ishmael to a panelist. Yes. Ishmael, the floor is yours. Can you hear us?
Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for all. Okay. Sorry. Thank you very much for your inspiring presentations to all the panelists. My name is Ishmael. I am from Green Hope, Sierra Leone. My question is for Mrs. Robinson. The economic fallout of the pandemic will have a severe effect on smaller developing nations. What should these priorities in terms of policies once the COVID lockdown are lifted?
Thank you, Ishmael. Mrs. Robinson?
Thank you, Ishmael, for that important question. You know, we need a concerted global COVID-19 response that particularly addresses the problems of poorer developing countries who, for no fault of their own, are disproportionately affected by COVID-19 for the reasons that I was giving. The capital has flown out of Africa, the remittances are gone, the commodities are not trading at the same way, everything is a negative. And then you have the climate impacts being greater, and now COVID-19 being disproportionately affecting. So we have been calling, I've joined Gordon Brown and a number of other former heads of state and government to appeal for a massive addressing of this by the G20. First of all, with significant debt relief, and then with significant COVID response, and then the way in which investment needs to help the Build Back Better. And this has been mentioned already on this panel, the trillions that need to now go green very significantly and help developing countries, but also help in building resilience in order to cope with future pandemics, because COVID-19 is a lesson to us. It's not going to be the only one. And it is the poorest countries that are so disproportionately affected. And my heart goes out to them because I know the reality on the ground that is being faced. And as I say, you know, if we had more real global leadership, we'd be in a better place. We had global leadership for the crisis in 2008, but it actually more helped the banks than anyone else. We need a people-centered, real global initiative that you know, is a response that matches what we're saying on this panel, that we have to move forward in a different way, but we have to do it with fairness and equity and understand the need for solidarity. The 2030 agenda has problems, as we pointed out, but it does have good language of leave no one behind. And that we have to keep in mind.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Robinson. And thank you so much, Ishmael, for your question.
I'm afraid I have to leave. I've just got another meeting, so if I may.
Sure, thank you so much, Mrs. Robinson.
Sorry about that. Okay.
Our next question is from Hitasha. So I will be promoting you to the panelist. Hitasha, you have the floor. If you can unmute. Yes.
Hello.
Yes. Hello.
My name is Hitasha and I'm from Oman. I want to say thank you to all the panelists for this amazing discussion. My question is to Ms. Maria. There have been several examples of cooperation and coordination amongst the nations in responding to the COVID crisis. Once the crisis is over, do you think this trend of cooperation will continue amongst the nations?
Thank you, Hitasha. Ms. Maria?
Well, thank you for your question, Hitasha. And I have to start very quickly by apologizing. I got so, you know, enthusiastic about speaking about Building Back Better and others. And I was asked to talk about SDG number 1 and 2. And of course, I touched on the poverty issue and on the food security threat, which is a real threat to humanity. We have seen the last numbers and they're very disheartening, because we know that 130 million people suffer from acute food insecurity, and the experts are saying that this number can double. We're speaking here about 300 million people with hunger because of COVID. And I just wanted to add that little, but your question was about coordination and cooperation and collaboration after COVID. And I think that any global challenge, any responsibility to handle and decide over our commons, our public goods, has to be, you know, under the umbrella of global cooperation, of greater solidarity. So we do need, as Mary was saying, we do need a strong collective action. We do need global leadership. We do need to act together. And for that, I think that we really need to come to terms with a strong multilateral system. In multilateral system, multipolar world is also, you know, the combination of regional initiatives. Unfortunately, I come from a region, Latin America, where we have had several difficulties with our own regional integration schemes. And we see that it's vital for a global response. whether you speak about climate change, about the nuclear threat, about pandemics, not only COVID, but perhaps more that are going to come in the future. You know, the go it alone response, the unilateral response, that my country first, it's largely insufficient. If we do not tackle and solve, you know, the devastating impacts of COVID in the small island developing states like the Bahamas, and tackle what is happening in Africa and Latin America and the poorest countries in the globe, then the issue is not going to be fixed in the Northern Hemisphere countries. So I think that concrete ways of cooperation and collaboration are more needed than ever in the post-COVID response, in what is going to happen afterwards and during. And for that, we need a strong global governance schemes. We need agreed, this social contract that we're talking about has to come from collective action and voices, and not only from governments, but from civil society. I'm so encouraged to see so many young people, and under the leadership, of course, of Kekushan, but also the elders. I mean, the responses have to be, intergenerational, gender sensitive, inclusive. Otherwise, we are going to have more of the same. So I'm very much, an advocate of a strong, accountable, proactive, multilateral system with the UN, as an epicenter. So I think that's what is important. And just to close, I really love a phrase from a US writer, Elie Wiesel, a Nobel laureate. And he said that the opposite of love is not hate, it is indifference. So we have to fight indifference, and we are here because we are not indifferent. And thank you, Hitasha.
Thank you so much, Ms. Marianne. Thank you, Hitasha, for your question. We will be able to take only one more question. So I will be promoting Erin Isabel to a panelist.
Hello, my name is Erin Isabel and I live in Dubai, UAE. It's an honor to be amongst all of you. My question is directed at Madam Kitagawa. Please could you share your perspectives on the importance of faith-based organizations during this pandemic? Have they become more important?
Thank you, Erin. Madam Kitagawa.
Thank you very much for your very important question. And I think faith-based organizations have been called to the forefront to really help in this pandemic. But faith-based organizations have historically shown up on the front lines during all kinds of disasters, whether natural disasters, pandemics. And I think Edgar had pointed out made a very good point in his answer to a question when he talked about the need for political will, but he also said religious communities have a very important role to play in the call for morality. And I think that's where religious communities stepping forward in the practice of the mission and vision of their organizations that always are based on the sacred texts that look to the ethical, moral principles upon which their religions are based. But as I had shared earlier, in the ethical grounding and principles, we really are talking about that sacred ground of being where religions arise from that sacred ground of being of a common morality, and yet this common morality, the ethical principles, actually transcend religions. And I wanted to share with you the Parliament of the World's Religions Global Ethic, which is the Parliament's signature document. And please go to our website to download it. But it is the foundation upon which our work is built. And it is an interfaith global organization. And it has 5 very important directives, the expressions of which I think address this important grounding, which religious communities really move to the forefront in helping others. And the 5 directives very quickly are: 1, nonviolence and respect for life; 2, solidarity and a just economic order; 3, tolerance and a life of truthfulness; 4, equal rights and partnerships between men and women; and 5, sustainability and care for the earth. So what we are addressing here are the disciplines for practicing. And I think this is why religious communities have survived all these years, is because we as spiritual beings are looking for the guidance, looking for the ways in which we can connect more to what we inherently understand to be our sacred spiritual lives. That really is the basis upon which all of life arises. It comes from a divine source, and that divine source is a sacred source. Its remembrance calls us to develop our hearts of loving kindness, compassion, and in that way, we as human beings, taking on human form, but really disguising our spiritual nature, really finds the enduring attraction of faith-based organizations, because they become the vectors and vehicles of the expressions of our ability to express caring for each other. So for example, when Hurricane Katrina came through the US, the first responders to help the people on the ground was not the US government, was not any kind of government. The first responders was the Salvation Army. And they were the first ones there to provide hot meals to the people. So in that respect, faith-based organizations have demonstrated again and again their importance in stepping to the forefront immediately as civil society actors as well, to provide the kind of relief addressing human suffering, which our moral foundation calls upon all of us to move forward in expressing our care, our love, our compassion for each other. And Mother Teresa said, the only religion in life is kindness. And how we live our lives, being the expression of kindness through every loving thought, word, and deed, is the manifestation of the true faith-based organizations in action within ourselves every day, for where we are is the holy ground, and we must be able to actualize that reality here, now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madam Kitagawa, and thank you so much, Erin, for your question. I saw that we had 2 more raised hands. I will be emailing the questions to our panelists, if that's all right with you. And on that note, I would just like to request our panelists to give in 60 seconds a concluding remark. So we'll go in the same order. Madam Kitagawa?
Yes, I just want to express my deepest appreciation and gratitude to you, Kekushan, your Green Hope Foundation, all of our eminent speakers and panelists, and all of our listeners all around the world for taking the time to come and be together today to address these very important systemic issues which we are all facing, and to really learn how to be together in this space, in time, and express why and how we care. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madam Kitagawa. Ms. Maria?
Well, thank you. Thank you. Just to say thank you, Kekushan, and thank you to the Green Hope Foundation for always bringing us together, but from a very intergenerational, sensitive group from different backgrounds, different regions. That's why the discussions are so, so rich. But just final thought, I think that each one of us has a role to play in this crisis. I think we all matter, and individually, collectively, in our communities, government, the multilateral system. And I think we should see this crisis as an opportunity to fight indifference, to fight selfishness. It is an opportunity to build a new common sense, a new social contract that will work for all, for people and for the planet. And for that, I think that we need, as Mary was saying, and Madam Kitagawa as well, more compassion, more generosity, more cooperation. And I think that we need to go back to basics. So thank you for this opportunity and for bringing the Sustainable Development Goals and Agenda 2030 to the center of our conversations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Maria. Dr. Edgar?
Well, thank you. Thank you indeed for inviting us to participate in this beautiful virtual panel and discussion. I think it has been very productive and illustrative. I think, Kekushan, that I was just thinking about what to say, and I say, well, I'm still a very optimistic person, and I think and I hope that the new normality brings more humanity among us. That's what I'm hoping, and not only more humanity, but also a new social contract for nature. And I think that is an important thing, and as Maria was saying, that is going to depend on each of us, governments, parliaments. They are facilitators, but it's going to depend on in each of us, and that is something that I really feel happy because from the sample of the audience that participated in the panel, I have the feeling that all of them are very young. And those are the guys that are, you guys, I mean, you yourself, the guys that are going to have the torch in the near future. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Dr. Edgar. Latonia?
Hi again. I just wanted to say thank you, Kekushan. This was a very informative presentation. I too learned very much from our panelists. I appreciate the need and the call for faith-based ministries. I think that's something that has often been overlooked in most discussions lately, and I think it's important. I also think that it brings to the point that we should live purposefully. We should consider that the wealth of the nation does not only lie in its natural resources, but also its human capital. I think that it's important for us to ensure that we can show love and kindness and certainly get back to basics. I think we have to be the change that we want to be in this world, and I think it's important for us to leave no one behind. And let's look at our barriers not as a challenge, but let's look at them as opportunities for the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Latonia. And on that note, we conclude our webinar. Thank you so much to all our panelists. It's been an extremely enlightening discussion, and the road ahead does have many hurdles, some that are known, some that are not. But I believe, and this discussion really gives me that hope, that there is now a greater resolve to build back, not just build back better, but build back together. And it is this solidarity and intent to collaborate that gives us hope of overcoming the devastating effects of the pandemic and move ahead on the road towards Agenda 2030, and as well as embrace our common humanity. So we shall see you at our next panel of the summit, which is on 19th June. So till we meet again, please stay safe. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.